I wrote down that this whole track makes me think of the word hootenanny. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I feel like this song wouldn't be kicked out of a hootenanny.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 1001 Album Complaints. It's the show where friends, musicians, and general complainers tell the stories behind history's most influential albums as immortalized in the list of the 1001 albums you must hear before you die. We'll hit some history, some stats on the artist and album, then do a deep dive on a handful of the tracks, along with some audio clips, and at the end, we're all going to vote on whether you actually need to hear this album before you die, and then we'll randomly select next week's album. I want to thank you for spending some time with us today as we fire up this episode. I want to give you two quotes, one about this album and one about the artist. About this album, Elvis Costello once described it as the most adventurous record made in the rock medium, and there hasn't been a record with that amount of daring made since. Keep in mind, though, Costello once said that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. Regarding the artist, a guy named Joe Smith, I swear that's his name, I didn't just make that up, he was the national program manager at Warner Brothers, and upon seeing tonight's artist at a small club in Boston, remarked that he was a hateful little guy. He might as well have been in Philadelphia. Which
ouch.
Okay. I guess I take a little pride in that Philly quote there. Right, so is that an insult? Is it a compliment? I'm not sure. But either way, this week we're diving into the 1968 album, Astral Weeks by Van Morrison. So we'll get to our cast, our introductions, and our tweet-length reviews in just a minute. But first, let's jump into the opening track from this album. This song is called Astral Weeks.
If I ventured in the slipstream between the viaducts of your dream, where mobile steel rims crack and the ditch and the back road stop, could you find me? Or would you kiss my eyes?
All right, there it is, a little flavor, a little context for the conversation that will follow. Now we're going to go around the studio. We'll get an introduction from our crew along with those tweet-length reviews. So let's send it first today to Phil.
Hey guys, Phil is here today. Had an interesting time checking out Astral Weeks this week. My tweet-length review. Guys, I can't tell if this is divinely inspired genius, free-flowing, uninhibited expression, not unlike James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, or am I just listening to a drunkard with perfect pitch ramble his neo-romantic poetry that he scrawled into his notebook drunkenly and now is rereading? Did I mention he's drunk for the first time since scrawling it into his notebook? And he has a pretty good live acoustic band behind him.
I mean, listen, at least two of the authors that you mentioned were just raging alcoholics.
So yeah, he's continuing the whatever. All right. Let's throw it over to Rob next. Rob.
Thanks so much, Adam. This is Rob here. I wrote that Astral Weeks is to rock music what the Lord of the Rings books are to the fantasy lit canon. Discursive, rambling, often boring, plus they both rely heavily on the made-up language of thoroughly intoxicated nerds. But also, they each offer a peek into a self-contained alternate dimension, complete with its own characters, geographies, and mythologies that draw you in and make you want to live there, at least for a little while.
Damn, heavy, man. All right, Tom, what do you got?
Alrighty, come along for the ride as a musician discovers the joys of combining, I'm assuming, marijuana and jamming for the first time on Astral Weeks by listening to Van Morrison's musical diatribe against the held chord. I swear to God, there's not a fucking held chord in this entire album. Everything is strummed or flittery, flittery, flittery.
All right, this is Adam, and my quick tweet is that if you want to get screamed at by an unintelligible Irishman who's constantly repeating himself and playing an out-of-tune guitar, you don't need to travel to Belfast or even your local pub. Van Morrison's Astral Weeks has got you covered with an offering that I found at times to be a little overhyped. There might be some pros and cons going on here. I thought I might have been the only initial naysayer on this, but we'll see what happens. I have a thesis on this album.
I have one too. Adam hates art. Please continue.
You may actually be right there. So I read a book this week.
Which Berenstain Bears book was this?
Yeah.
Get in a fight. It's pretty good.
No, it was go to the dentist, I think.
The Berenstain Bears get fucked up and jammed for 12 hours.
It had to do with 1968. I think it was actually called Astral Weeks. I also watched a documentary on this, and here's my thesis. If Van Morrison had gotten into some terrible car accident and was in a coma for 6 months, and he stood up one day, and he just walked out of the hospital dragging his IV with him and stormed into the studio and grabbed a guitar and laid all of these tracks down in one take, yeah, that'd be impressive. But the fact that he spent 4 months prepping this material with his girlfriend, playing it live in clubs, it leaves a little to be desired for me.
Well, you're talking about the intensive prep work done by, and again, I don't have any evidence for this, but I'm just assuming that he discovered marijuana for the first time and then also did not curtail his drinking at all and was just, Hufflepuffing his way through it. I can't imagine that this was an incredibly prepared product.
Yeah,
especially when he brought it to the studio, right?
Well, you said prepared with his girlfriend. My understanding is that the writing process was him literally strumming an acoustic guitar with the tape running for 12 hours at a time. And then they would just go back over that and go, oh, this 30 seconds was all right.
But for 4 months...
She's like, that time where you went, that's pretty good.
Which time?
Well, I'm sure you got to get into it too. But the bands he was actually playing with on stage, they got to the studio and they were like, nah, get out of here. We got these pros. We don't need you anymore.
Yeah. So that's a good transition point there, Rob. So let's get into some history of Van Morrison and this album. So our main man here, Van Morrison, born in 1945 in Belfast, Northern Ireland. His father traveled a lot to Detroit here in the U.S., where he started to assemble a huge collection of American records. Everything from blues and gospel, country, jazz, with artists like Woody Guthrie, Leadbelly, Mahalia Jackson, Hank Williams. So for a child born right after World War II, he had a remarkable amount of music at his fingertips. So he was listening to this growing up. At age 11, he picked up the guitar. He starts a couple skiffle bands around the age of 12. Are you familiar with skiffle?
Oh, yeah. This came up on the Bee Gees episode, right? They started a skiffle band because that was what John and Paul were in, a skiffle band.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like early British rockabilly, right? Like kind of proto-rock music.
I think that's about right.
He's playing in bands, and around 16, 17 years old, he's actually making a decent living. He's traveling around some different countries and playing. So in 1964, at age 21, he forms the band Them. They're discovered by a guy named Phil Solomon, who promptly arranges an audition in front of Dick Rowe, who, if you don't know the name, you may remember.
Great name.
It's a great name. He was the guy who passed on the Beatles, telling Brian Epstein, guitar groups are on their way out.
Prognosticator over there. Yeah.
Classic.
Right.
If I was that guy, I would have worn a t-shirt with that quote on it all through the 70s.
So Dick Rowe likes them and gets them signed by Decca Records, and they have a 2-year contract. So right out of the gate, Them releases a single. Wait, that sounds very poor English, but the band is Them. They release a single called Don't Start Crying Now, which was a commercial flop. So now Decca has to rethink their direction for the band, and they bring in an American producer named Burt Burns.
Can we just for 1 second talk about like the insanity of the pressure cooker there of like, you released one single and it did not blow up. What the fuck are we going to do? It's like,
we need to shake things up. We need to re-architect this band. So they bring in this guy, Burt Burns, who co-wrote Twist and Shout for the Isley Brothers and also co-wrote Under the Boardwalk for the Drifters.
Burt Burns, very famously, played a prominent role in our Solomon Burke episode. One of the very early episodes he wrote Cry to Me, and he was very much involved in the early career of Solomon Burke, getting him kind of off the ground. He's the guy who had the congenital heart defect and like kind of always thought that he was about to die, and then did at 38. He was sort of had this whole like, I need to be a rock star before I die type of thing.
Yeah, so they bring in the hit maker, and it works. They release 2 hits that get them into the top 10. Baby Please Don't Go, which had Gloria, which is a song that Van Morrison became known for. That was the B-side. And the other single was Here Comes the Night. So overall, the band is pretty successful. They released 2 albums. They toured a bit in the U.S., but at the end of the U.S. tour, that included a quick set with the Doors in Los Angeles, the band started to fight, the usual personalities, management, money, so they break up. Van Morrison heads back to Belfast, where he starts working on some new material. Rob, you mentioned just him sitting in a room with a 2-track, just getting ideas out.
Well, can we just say you glossed over Gloria and Baby Please Don't Go? Because I think that Baby Please Don't Go is a pretty big hit as well. That was getting played on classic rock radio when we were growing up. And Gloria is sort of a prototypical garage rock song that I think almost everyone knows, definitely strongly associated with Van Morrison. But just the idea that band was very garage rock, 60s pop. One of the things that surprised me right off the bat, I'm sure we'll get to general impressions, which is how early this record came out. I think in my head, I thought it was like came out in the mid 70s because it feels a little ahead of its time. So the fact that it was only a couple years earlier, he was making Gloria, to me is kind of astounding.
Let's flash back to New York, where Bert Burns, coming off of these hits, forms his own label called Bang Records, and he's looking for talent. Now, it turns out that Bert Burns, while not a member of the mob himself, is pretty cozy with a guy named Carmine Wassel DeNoia.
Also a great name.
DeNoia is classified in the 60s by the FBI as a low-level mobster. That doesn't mean this guy's a sweetheart. Here's some of DeNoia's greatest hits. He once bragged about breaking his way into a radio station, grabbing the DJ and hanging him by his ankles out a 9th-story window just to shake him up during some of the payola stuff that was going on the prior decade. He also one time threw the singer/artist/performer Tiny Tim off a yacht into the Hudson River, which I think maybe he did, right. Maybe that's in the pro corner there.
Wait, how long has Tiny Tim been around? I thought he was like an 80s phenomenon.
No, I think he appeared in some of those black and white variety shows in the 60s as well. Huh. All right, so now Bert Burns calls Van Morrison, right? He needs talent. So he convinces him to come to New York. Morrison, looking to get his solo career moving, agrees, comes to New York, signs a $2,500 contract with Bang Records, but big surprise, he doesn't read the contract. So he shows up.
You're telling me that a musician was not detail oriented when it came to legal paperwork? What the fuck?
So he shows up in New York City to record for this Bang Records session with a bunch of the material that he'd been working on in Belfast. Day one, he walks into the studio, and there's like 40 people in the studio. There's 4 guitar players, there's 4 keyboard players. Bert Burns is calling all the shots. Van Morrison is miserable. Bert Burns even forces him to change the lyrics from brown-skinned girl to brown-eyed girl.
Good call, Bert.
Yeah.
Good call. Yeah.
That probably worked out, probably sold a few more albums in a super racist 1960s. So they finish the sessions, and Morrison heads back to Northern Ireland. Unbeknownst to Morrison, Burns is hoping to cash in on the psychedelic hippie craze and releases the 8 songs as an album called Blowin' Your Mind, complete with trippy fonts and a picture of Van Morrison sweating, trying to make it sound like it's like, acid music, when Brown Eyed Girl is like the happiest go lucky song you could ever think of.
The fact that was one of my greatest discoveries, because I'm not the biggest, I know Van Morrison's greatest hits, but going back and seeing that his first album was called Blowin' Your Mind, and that's titled unironically, that's hilarious. Right. That's great.
Just a thought, Rob, I'll throw this to you. Do you think Lou Reed heard the story about brown-eyed girl, brown-skinned girl, and sort of baked that into Walk on the Wild Side?
I think Lou was always looking for ways to be edgy. Yeah, it's not impossible, certainly. They're both huge dicks, so that makes sense.
Yes.
You wonder if the Rolling Stones heard that and they were like, you know what? Let's just lean all the way into the fucking racism. We'll do Brown Sugar, and we'll just make that like unambiguously we'll somehow be empowering and also very racist at the same time for black women.
And then the next song will say, there's a bunch of Puerto Rican girls that are dying to make you.
You love Mick Jagger. He's your favorite.
Yeah.
I feel I would be remiss if we didn't bring up David Bowie's China Girl at this time.
Yes. He was trying to get on that new racism. He's like, what's the new racism that we can get on? You know?
Gotta innovate.
Yeah.
Rules of 3. All right, we hit the racist songs there right at the top. All right, so Brown Eyed Girl did really well, but the album overall is a failure. And Morrison is super pissed because he just thought Burns was exploiting him because Van had come over to the U.S. thinking he was writing 8 songs to be released as 4 singles, and Burns kind of pulled the carpet out from under him.
Can we hold on for a second and say that this album was not a success? With one of like the most recognizable fucking pop songs of the last 100 years on it. You're like, oh, it wasn't a what is a success then? What's a success if that's not a success?
I don't, maybe Adam has more details, but I kind of got the impression that it was a marketing problem because the song was getting a ton of play, but they talked about how people did not know who recorded the song, who this guy was, even to the point where when one of the session guys was got invited up on stage to play with Van Morrison at a gig before the Astral Weeks sessions, he was like, I had no idea who this guy was until they handed me the chart for Brown Eyed Girl 30 seconds before we started the song.
Right.
And he somehow managed to play along to the Brown Eyed Girl with only a chart in 30 seconds. Crazy. Yeah. Do you remember that gig that we had where we played at the radio station at the University of Delaware? We played live at a radio station
At 2 in the morning.
At 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And the guy was
I do remember that.
My requirement is that everybody who comes and plays on my show closes with Brown Eyed Girl. So you have to do your version of Brown Eyed Girl. And I feel like we just fucked our way through that song. Just yeah, my Brown Eyed Girl. Just playing that bass line oh God, I hate this song so much.
All right, so Morrison comes back to New York, but is so pissed at Burns that he starts sabotaging press releases.
I thought you were going to say drink.
He's been drinking.
Yeah.
He's been drinking the whole time.
Since he was 11, I'm sure.
Right. So at some point, as Morrison is back in the U.S., Burt Burns' friend Denoya, our mobster friend, at some point breaks an acoustic guitar over Van Morrison's head. And a separate time, Van and his girlfriend Janet came back to their hotel room to find the door full of bullet holes. So Van Morrison is in this really weird spot where he's got this kind of gangster guy who's got him hooked on a contract that he didn't want to be a part of, and he's also trying to do a solo thing. So people won't hire him because of this mob thing going on. So now this is a perfect spot for By the Numbers. All right, so we're going to throw some quick numbers out there. Not a super long list, but some fun ones. 44, the number of studio albums Van Morrison has released.
What?
That's insane.
That Bushmills don't pay for itself, man.
Right.
I love, audience, just take a moment to appreciate that Tom got the correct Irish whiskey.
It's the Protestant one. Hell yeah.
It's the Protestant whiskey.
Very important. No Jamesons in that house.
All right. 7 live albums under his belt. 80, the number of singles that he has released. 8, the number of songs on Astral Weeks. A little slim considering it's 47 minutes. 2,600. The bar tab that them ran up after a 2-week run at Whiskey A Go-Go. Mind you, the beer was free and they got half off liquor. So in $2023, that would be $24,000. But that was half. So they racked up $48,000 in liquor over 14 days at Whiskey A Go-Go.
Wow.
Story checks out.
The last number, 20,000. That is the amount in cash that was required to get Van Morrison out of his Bang contract. But more on that in a second. Let's throw out some general impressions on what you guys feel. How was your week?
So I would love to talk general impressions. So I should start by saying I have a history with this record. I think I first heard it maybe 20 years ago. It has a nostalgic element for me, but this is the first time, as we always say on this podcast, that I've given it a really strong, intense listen. I love it. I think it's great. I definitely think there's some spots to make fun of. We can get into that. But overall, I agree it's a masterpiece. And I'm sure we're going to talk about the hype because researching it this week was the first time I really heard about all the hype of it. So I totally get how coming in, maybe Adam, with that context, since it's new for you, that is going to hype it up a little bit. It's going to maybe change your expectation set. Just pointing out that I didn't have any of that when I listened to it in 2004. I think of it like, even though there are no Van Morrison hits in quotes on this, I don't think they released any singles. One, I think that actually helps the record quite a bit to be much more of a complete vibe record. It could all be one song, to be honest. I made notes on the songs, but they're kind of all the same song. But to my mind, this record is what captures his aesthetic very, very well, which is a sort of a wild, drunken, freewheeling aesthetic. And I'm into it. I'm for it. It gives me a very clear picture in my mind of a pastoral setting and rolling green hills and that kind of stuff.
Pastoral and like rolling green hills is interesting. Like, it's very stream of consciousness. It very much does evoke imagery. Yeah, I see all the things you're saying. Maybe I just haven't spent enough time with it. Like, maybe a week wasn't long enough to realize that there's characters, mythology. I was definitely expecting something more like Pet Sounds. Although I don't know what I was expecting. I definitely heard the lore as well, but had never spent time with the record. The songs are long.
They are. I didn't realize just how long our focus list was, but I think it's like 4 or 5 7-minute songs.
So it's so funny you mention that. So I guess I'm going to play defense on this one because
sure.
While I'll have to objectively agree with what y'all are saying, and again, I made some specific notes on the specific songs, I've never perceived it that way. To me, it is the epitome of a background vibe record, something I put on and I don't really think about again, and I'm just in that world for some period of time, which is what my tweet implied. And the other thing that did occur to me on reflection this week is that I do think it's a great record for your mid-20s, which is when I first listened to it, and it's when Van was making it. And what I mean by that is it's a time that's both carefree, but has the pressure of future decisions kind of looming on it, where you're caught between being responsible, but also you could get day drunk on a whim with your friends. To me, it has that vibe to it very much.
Yeah, my week was a series of ups and downs. Like I'd mentioned, I started reading the book, I watched the documentary. Before I listened to the album, I was familiar with one of the songs that will hit on the focus list, Sweet Thing. And my wife had introduced me to that 20 years ago. It's a cool song, and I really liked it. So when I heard this on the album, I thought, oh, this will be nice. I thought knew what I was in for. But as the week progressed, it was kind of this curve of liking it more and then eventually coming back down on the other side where I just couldn't unhear a lot of the problems that I heard the first couple times through. So a bit of a struggle for me this week. Tom, how was your week?
I actually had a pretty good time listening to Richard Davis's Astral Weeks featuring Van Morrison. I got to tell you, Bass Clinic on this album. He is a monster. He really is a fantastic bass player. And I feel like the entire session felt at its best like a jam session. And the best jam sessions are always led by either a bass player or a piano player. They kind of bridge the gap between rhythm and melody. And I feel like there were problems with the songs. A lot of them were way too long, very rambling, but the ability to just focus in on the bass work really made it much more palatable to me in the times where I was kind of struggling to get through some of these songs. So
kudos to the rest of the band as well, because reading some quotes from Rolling Stone about how the actual recording sessions happened is that Van Morrison went into the booth with his guitar by himself, and the other musicians were essentially not in the same room as him, playing along. I guess you can kind of hear that, because I feel like there are moments where, maybe they missed some hits. The other things I thought was very interesting is that all of the string arrangements were added a month after the recording. Van Morrison heard them and was upset. He didn't like them. He thought that they ruined the album and that it wasn't Astral Weeks as he envisioned it. And the strings were the one thing that I thought actually was a through line and kept me interested with, a counter melody, something to latch onto. Otherwise, Rob, like you said, it just kind of felt like one 47-minute song.
Well, I had a question about that. And it seemed like there was a distinction orally listening to this between just the violin and then strings, like multiple strings being put in. And I wondered if the violin was actually in the room playing or if the violin was also added later.
I'm pretty sure I thought that too. I noticed that because one is like a fiddle that's just like jamming and it really flows with the song.
Yeah.
As opposed to these arrangements of a string quartet or something. I think it was all string overdubs. Strings and horns were all overdubs. And then everything else we haven't mentioned yet, more or less is like 1 or 2 takes live. That's the singing. That's all the other acoustic instruments. And they didn't labor over these songs very long, which means you're going to get mistakes. Definitely.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure we're going to point them out. But I kind of think I think to call them out in a way is, I mean, that's what our podcast is about, but it's also missing the point.
Sure.
There's something that's sort of coming up over and over, and I didn't look at it through this lens for a multitude of reasons. One, I probably had expectations about Van Morrison. 2, there's vocals. But I mean, ultimately, you're just talking about a jazz record. Everybody's cool with all the things that we're complaining about on a jazz record. Nobody cares if the songs are 7 minutes long. Nobody cares if somebody farts a note out here or there, right? Like it happened because like that take was hot, you know? Like,
I feel like the musicians were, by and large, pretty killer.
Oh, these guys are cooking for sure.
Richard Davis is a killer, and who's the drummer? Connie something or other.
First of all, where are the drums on this record? I mean, I saw her credited, but
Connie is a he. He was in with a modern jazz quartet. Like,
just mix them out right at the end, just full cut. You know, a little bit of bleed. It's all you get.
It's pretty minimal. Maybe he's playing the vibes too. I'm not sure where the percussion
think that
is.
These guys are coming in. Well, there's also a separate percussionist listed as there's drums and percussion, but I think that these guys were much more used to a structured setting with charts and everything. And by all accounts, Van Morrison rolled in and was just like, oh, the song kind of goes like this. Anyone would be in the booth. And they were like, he didn't even introduce himself. He didn't say hi in the mornings and shit. He sounds like a total dick, if I'm being honest. Like everybody sort of describes him as being a total dick, but it sounds so unprofessional and unfocused in the way that he approached it, which was just sort of like, I got these ideas and I'm going to be in the other room and you just kind of do your thing over it.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's always interesting for me to, what was he, like 24 when this is going on, or in that zone, right? And just the fact that he's a notorious grumpy bastard, but we, you know, in our lifetime, he's mostly been an older guy. So the idea that he was like that even at 24, even pre-fame, to me is hilarious.
In line with that, he's an asshole thing. I did read one story, and I didn't see when it was or where it was, but apparently he played some other guy's acoustic guitar on stage and smashed it. And as he was walking off stage, looked at the guy and said, "Hey, man, that's art." And then like left the club. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I heard a story about how he laid down on stage and refused to get back up for like an hour, just in the middle of the set.
I think Marty has got the story of a friend of his who lived in Ireland and was a waiter at like a local pub that Van Morrison would come and frequent. And he said that he would always be there with like a younger woman, like a much, much younger woman. It usually wasn't the same younger woman.
Yeah. I've heard this story. Like this would have been like the early 2000s. Right?
Yeah.
This would have been yeah.
And apparently he would just eat like a pig and drink and be a complete and total dick to everybody, including the woman that he was there with. Just be like, you know, shoving shepherd's pie in his mouth and like slugging fucking booze and be like, shut the fuck up. Now, this is apocryphal. I cannot verify this. This is, this is a third-hand story, but based upon everything that I've learned about Van Morrison, I do not doubt it in any way, shape, or form.
Not that out of character.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump back into the history because we're going to get ourselves up to when this album is recorded and released. So in December of 1967, Bert Burns, Tom, you mentioned, died of a heart attack, and his widow blamed Van Morrison for basically how Van was treating him.
Not the congenital heart defect that he had known about since he was a child. It was told it was going to kill him before he was 40. Yes,
It's got to be the leprechaun.
Yeah.
Van pushed him over the edge. So Morrison and his girlfriend at the time, Janet, get the hell out of New York. They move up to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Morrison gets a band together to hone some of the new material that he'd been working on and book some gigs at a place called the Catacombs in Boston. Joe Smith, again, super generic, he's the national promotion manager for Warner Brothers, goes and sees one of the gigs and comments that he enjoyed the material but thought that he was a real curmudgeon. Now, there was a clause in Van Morrison's contract that required him to write and record an additional 36 songs. So Morrison went into the studio and in one session just recorded a bunch of garbage. including a song called Ringworm, which we'll drop right here. It's absolutely insane.
My personal favorite is Want a Danish. Like on some of the songs, like at least the guitar is playing like chords that go together. And on Want a Danish, he sounds like he's actively trying to make it as unpleasant as possible to listen to.
Oh, bread up front. You want a sandwich? Have a Danish. You want a sandwich?
Oof. I'm not sure how you're positioning that story, but I love that story. I think that's a great story. Didn't Prince?
That is hilarious.
Didn't Prince
yes.
do something similar when he wanted to get out of a contract? Or?
Prince's story is a little different in that whatever record he released after that contract with Warner Brothers was like a triple disc. And it came out like immediately. And he basically couldn't write anything down because Warner Brothers like owned his notebooks.
And also as a nice, callback to Van Morrison smashing somebody's guitar and saying it's art, didn't Prince famously play with the Roots band on, it might have been on Jimmy Fallon, and smashed the guitar player's guitar that he had borrowed, and it was like a 1967 Fender. It was like a beautiful, and the guy was like, he bought me a new guitar, but this is like a 1960, this thing's been alive longer than me, and you just broke it for nothing, for no fucking reason. Like, why would you do that?
Because he's a dick.
Yeah, you're fucking
yeah. But listen, that doesn't get in the way. For me, and this has come up many times on the podcast, whether it's Morrissey or Van Morrison, all the Morrises, doesn't bother me at all. I can separate the artist from the art. It's not a problem.
All right, so to round out our Mafia story, so Louis Merenstein, who ultimately becomes the producer on this album, goes and sees Van Morrison at a gig, likes what he sees, and asks this guy, Joe Smith, to take care of the whole Mafia thing. So Smith, this is just a ridiculous series of people here. Smith reaches out to Don Rickles' manager, a guy named Joe Scandori. Scandori talks to his people and gives Smith specific directions to show up at some abandoned warehouse in Manhattan at 6 p.m. with a sack containing $20,000 in cash. He goes up 3 flights of stairs, gives the money to 4 guys he said looked like, linebackers. And they said that, okay, we're out of the music business, which meant he was scot-free, and Warner Brothers was now safe and free to sign Van Morrison and produce Astral Weeks.
One more thing about the whole contract dispute, because I found this to be just like delightfully spiteful. And I believe this came before Van Morrison's Spite album, where Eileen Burns, Burt Burns' widow, who owned his contract rights, tried to get him deported.
Yes, was holding that over his head.
She realized that, we had to file the paperwork to keep you in the country as we're your employer. And so fuck you. We're going to try to get you deported, which is just like another level of spite that I honestly kind of admire. It's fucking admirable.
That's deep.
She's like
that
pissing on her own money. She's just like, fuck you.
All for spite.
Yes.
All right, gents. So we're going to try a new segment here where I, Adam, will pick our co-host's brains in a segment I'm calling I Live in a Van Morrison Down by the River. So here's some trivia around America's favorite vehicle. Not a Ford Mustang, not a Corvette, but the trusty old van. All right. What 1980s television show had a cast that, according to some fans, should have included a 1983 GMC Vandura that appeared in nearly every episode? Rob.
The A-Team.
Yes. All right. All right, I lied. It's not just about vehicles. What year was the first Vans Warped Tour? 1991, 1993, 1995, or 1997? Phil.
I'm going 93.
No.
97?
No. Rob.
There's only one other option.
No idea.
91.
95.
95?
Right.
Okay, I thought.
Yeah, it was 95, yeah. All right, in the movie Dumb and Dumber, what is the year and make of the Shaggin' Wagon, a vehicle that's dressed up to look like a dog?
Why the fuck would I know that, Adam?
If you've memorized the movie like me, you know that according to a cop in the movie, it was a 1984 poodle. Well, it might have been a wire-haired terrier. They're very similar in appearance. All right, what is Van short for? In Van Morrison. Tom.
It's short for Ivan.
Yes, well done.
Wow.
Our last question here. Which character from the 80s show The Wonder Years shares a name with a van used by the Chop?
Winnie Cooper.
Phil, yes. Phil wins that one.
I was looking for more Van Morrison shit stories.
All right, I think Phil wins that one with Winnie Cooper. By the way, Phil's band Mega has a song called Winnie Cooper off the album The Valley Spirit Never Dies. Go look for it. It's on Spotify. It's a terrific song. Phil's band Mega also just released an EP called Grand Ultimate. Go find it. Also fantastic.
Well, actually, since you're mentioning it, Adam, we have it on our playlist, which is linked in the notes, all of Phil's band's greatest hits, as well as Tom and my efforts. So Winnie Cooper's on there. It's right in the link.
Thanks, guys. Is it my birthday or something? You guys. Is there going to be an intervention later?
Yeah. Well,
We're buttering you up. All right, speaking of songs, let's dive into our focus list, gents. So we're going to dive back into the opening track, Astral Weeks. Let's drop a little piece here. Not sure if you'll be able to tell we are playing a different part of the song.
Showing pictures on the wall, whispering in the hall. I'm pointing a finger at me. There you go, there you go.
I feel like I'm in the audience for this one because, you know, when we get some of the complaints we hear occasionally are that we overanalyze music and we don't just think about how it makes us feel. I love the first 30 seconds of this song. I love this whole song. I think it's a huge success. I see a clear connection now between this stream of consciousness songwriting between Bob Dylan and this, which I don't think I realized back in my 20s when I was a big Bob Dylan fan. And then also I think the lineage continues over to my other favorite that Adam hates, Bruce Springsteen, especially the early Bruce Springsteen recordings. It feels like a take one, but the best possible take one.
this is definitely a take one. This is like, if this is a take two at most. I know they don't give the notes like it's a jazz album, but this does feel like a jazz song. However, it's basically two chords. They changed to two other chords, but it's the same interval between those two chords.
Yeah.
And listen, I'm going to talk about this again and again and again, but holy shit, does Richard Davis just milk the most out of two chords on that bass? He really does. And they don't even vary in the treatment given to each chord. It's held the exact same amount of times. And man, it's really fucking good. I got to tell you, I am in Rob's camp, where normally I'd look at this and be like, what is this, like a 7.5 minute song or a 6.5 minute song or something? Normally I would hate something that was this long and rambling, but fucking goddamn, does it work.
Can I just comment on the jazz thing real quick? Because I agree. The bass is great. He's great throughout. I think all the musicians exercise a lot of excellent restraint and taste. And they're mostly all jazz folks. I think the guitar player played on some Mingus records and things like that, right? But I want to point out the distinction between how jazz stuff is structured versus this, because this is much more, I was going to say more improvisational than jazz, which sounds weird, but jazz itself often has a pretty clear structure, which is to say a chord chart where it's determined who's going to be playing the solo at any given time and who shall not be, and who shall be vamping or comping underneath those solos. That's a general aesthetic. In this case, I have the feeling like they don't know when Van is going to sing or not. And they have to just kind of find their moments and not overplay. And so I hear a lot of not overplaying in a really good way here.
You know, something that's like interesting playing jazz is that, you know, you're responding to what you hear, right? You're hearing notes, you're hearing rhythms, and you're responding. But when somebody adds words, like there's no, like the words mean something and everybody knows what they mean. Like you still have the sound and rhythm interpretations, but now you got this extra layer
I don't know what these words mean, by the way. Just gonna throw that out there. I don't know what these words mean.
Pretty abstract, yeah. Right.
I read lots of stuff that folks said within the first 10 seconds that he was on par with Dylan lyrically because Dylan brought the brain and Van Morrison brought the heart.
Well, can we talk about how he's obsessed with the slipstream? Like, he has a song later called The Queen of the Slipstream. Like, I feel like he found that word and he was like, have you heard this word, slipstream? It's pretty cool, man. Like,
it's crazy. Yeah. It's a word.
But like a hip hop record, there's a vernacular within this album that they keep referencing. He mentioned Cypress Avenue a bunch of times.
Yeah, right.
And that makes it feel more insular and I think adds to its effect. I want to comment on the Dylan thing real quick, which is I think he has a similar lyrical style to Dylan here and maybe a similar delivery. And maybe it sounds crazy, but it's the first time this week that I really thought about why Bob Dylan called his album the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Because he's he's mood wise, Bob Dylan is not freewheeling and carefree on that album in any way, shape, or form. So it just finally occurred to me that he was referring to his word vomit, his way of rambling through lyrics. And I think Van definitely takes a cue from that.
Well, I want to continue the comment on the jazz front here, which is that people think of jazz as purely improvisational and they think of it as like super free. And there is free jazz, certainly, but 99% of jazz is there is a melody and there's a head and there's a chord structure and you play the melody, you play the head, and then you get free and then you bring it back to the head. And there's just no head in this song. There's no like set melody and there's no set like, and then we all bring it back together. It just sort of is kind of rambling and free the entire time. And I imagine for them, they were probably not necessarily in that mode of like, no, there's nothing to pull it back to. We don't have a center. We just sort of do what you want, man.
They definitely don't know how to end the song. It gives, I find this charming, but it does almost like the Isley Brothers shout thing where it very slowly like reduces in volume and intensity over a long period of time, kind of like a band driven fade out as opposed to a volume knob driven fade out.
We've all been in that jam session, though. We're just like, how the fuck do we end this song? Oh, shit, I don't know. I'm just going to start playing a little less intensely, and a little less intensely, a little less intensely. And then there's that one person who keeps playing on. You're like, just fucking give it up. The song's over. Come on.
Well, I was struggling to think about this song, this 7-minute song with none of those strings. And I really feel like that would have been a lot more lackluster. Again, I know the strings were added after the fact, but they do some stuff that does propel it along a little bit. Like there's some different rhythmic hits that, perk your ear up. You're like, oh, something a little different.
Yeah.
But if there were no strings, this is literally just pounding the chords. And again, Tom, to your point, the other musicians make this something versus him just strumming 2 chords for 7 minutes.
No, I agree. The strings ground it. They're a great counterpoint to his melody. And learning just this week that they're all overdubs I think they're excellent overdubs. So I don't know how Van feels about them these days. He said he didn't like them at first, but he was wrong.
The string arrangements do feel like overdubs to me. I don't find it surprising. The horns too. No, I don't find that surprising. The flute too. The flute is added later.
Flute's in the room.
Flute's in the room.
Yeah.
Okay.
The flute was that guy John Payne.
Oh, John Payne, of course.
Well, no, what we didn't talk about was that the original bass player, Tom Kilbania, who was workshopping these songs with Van Morrison in the clubs in Massachusetts, gets like completely cut out of the session. But he's the guy who brought this flautist, John Payne, to the project. And then they show up and they're like, yeah, we'll take the flautist, but not you, guy who like actually brought him to the table. He must have been so fucking pissed. But also like the proof's in the pudding. Like Richard Davis is a goddamn monster on the bass on this album. So he probably can't even be mad about it.
I bet he can.
I mean, he's probably super mad about it. No, I have one question for you guys. One question. So there are 2 guitar players credited on this song. One is Van Morrison. The other one is that guy, Jay Berliner. Right at the very end of the song, there's like a very loud guitar that comes in and kind of does like this little lick. I think that is Van Morrison's guitar in the booth. And they got the mic cranked the fuck up for his vocal take. And he's not played the guitar the entire time. And then he just does that because it's so much louder than everything else right at that moment. I think that is Van Morrison's only guitar contribution to the song. I might be wrong. Might be wrong.
Let's drop that right here.
That sort of lead guitar kind of like bluesy lick that doesn't fit with the rest of the field.
But Van Morrison is strumming the rhythm guitar the entire time, right?
I don't know if he is.
Yeah, definitely, because there's there's a lead guitar and a rhythm guitar right at the beginning of the track.
Well, what I'm saying is I think that's Van Morrison in the booth playing that.
I buy it because I heard other times where he had volume control issues on what I assumed was his take, right? Because acoustic guitars, especially depending on what you're doing with them in post-production, if you're not like compressing the signal, you just hit it a little harder and it can get a lot louder. And especially when you switch from rhythm to lead, change how your pick hand is hitting it, or I don't know, maybe he's not even using a pick, unclear. So yeah, I buy it.
I heard about those volume issues too by listening to this album.
Can I just timestamp one other spot that just makes me laugh, but also that someone like Adam might hate? At 2:57, he gives a great wild drunk guy bellow. And there's so many of those on the record, to be clear.
Yeah.
Like, just take your pick, but that one makes me laugh.
I also had to laugh every time he said "kiss of my eyes," thinking back to that Elvis song, the hug. I'm gonna hug you too, like kiss of my eyes. Like,
he's got a couple tricks that he keeps going back to the well for, and they get a little old pretty early for me.
It's almost like he didn't work too hard on what he was going to do on this album.
All right, let's move things along to the next song on our focus list. This
hi-hat on it.
Fuck.
It's just a hi-hat, which is amazing, by the way. It's actually really good hi-hat work for just being a hi-hat.
Yeah, right.
It's a lot of restraint. But Adam, you said earlier that like you liked this song and then you started to love this song and then you came back down to just like liking the song again. You're wrong. This song's awesome.
This is actually my favorite song on the album. So I remember thinking when my wife played this for me, again, however many years ago it was, I remember thinking, I've never heard a song like this. This sounds unlike anything I've ever heard before. Just the mix and the sound of the guitar and the flute and everything. So this is actually my favorite tune on the album.
I think it's a great song too, but it is almost indistinguishable from all the other songs on the record. I find it very hard to pick a favorite or a least favorite on a record like this. They all sound pretty damn similar to me.
Well, except for my favorite song of the album, which is The Way Young Lovers Do, which does not sound like the rest of this album.
That's true. And I was a little surprised that Adam didn't add that to our list because that actually sounds the most like it could have been the single. And it's the most different. And it also sounds the most like Van Morrison's later stuff. Because like 2 years later, he goes and makes Moondance, or maybe even in less time, right?
Yeah.
He needed money. So after this album didn't do that great, I think he went back to Ireland again, and he's eating crumbs and was thinking like, well, I somehow need to make money.
Maybe I should put singles on the next record.
Well, I mean, they're drinking $3,500 worth of booze a day. Like that's gonna add up fast.
No. But I gotta comment on, you throw Brown Eyed Girl, any song on Astral Weeks, and then Moondance together, and then that's like a 3 to 4 year span. They're pretty different sounding. That's a pretty good range in an artist's lifetime, let alone the early part of an artist's career. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think that gives it. I agree. I think that gives it some good context. The fact how early this was in his career, that was new information to me, and it sounds a little like someone's searching around for their sound. And I gotta be honest, I don't really know the Van Morrison catalog too far past the mid '70s.
Yeah. What you don't like Cleaning Windows? Come on, man. It's actually my favorite Van Morrison song.
I don't. I think I know Moondance and I know St. Dominic's
Preview. Yeah.
Preview.
Well, Domino was released in 70.
In 70?
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. November of 1970.
Oh, Domino. That song? That sounds so much later. Good Lord.
He's got a great pack of hits. There's no doubt about it. I think everyone would agree to that. I want to hear what Adam thinks about his voice overall. We've talked about how improvisational and stream of consciousness his lyrics are, but I have to say, I do agree that his voice has a lot of emotion and power.
Alan, who's another co-host on the podcast here, is not on this week, mentioned go look at his performance in The Last Waltz. And I mean, he has a monster of a voice. He does some inflection things here that annoy me a little bit. He keeps going to the well for the repeating the words, and he's got that high-pitched kind of squeal thing. But overall, I like his voice.
He's pretty loosey-goosey with his voice, I gotta say. He sings like a drunk. Like, let's just call a spade a spade. He sings like a drunk. But he sings like the best drunk.
A good drunk.
Singing in the bar they could possibly have. Yeah.
All right, let's move along to the next song on our focus list, Cypress Avenue.
Well, I'm caught one more time up on Cypress Avenue. I'm caught one more time up on Cypress Avenue.
Know what this album needs? Harpsichord.
I'm convinced that the harpsichord is just the classical music version of the banjo. That is my opinion. I will die on that hill. It's just a classical banjo.
I'm glad you said that because I wrote down that this whole track makes me think of the word hootenanny. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I feel like this song wouldn't be kicked out of a hootenanny.
I have a social fantasy as somebody who played cover music for 10 years, and people would come up and instead of saying the song that they wanted, they would always ask by the artist, like, hey, do you know any Sublime? Okay, you want to hear Santeria, right? Hey, do you know any Van Morrison? They want to hear Brown Eyed Girl. I would have loved to have played this song when someone asked for Van Morrison and pointed them out and been like, hey, Steve right there wanted to hear this song.
And then you could be like, way up on, 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 way up on for like 7 minutes.
Way up on, 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 way up on.
Not just the girls. Way up on, way up on, way up on, way up on.
His voice is mixed so far out in front on this song. Like, he's mixed out in front on most of the songs on this album, but this was like offensively far out front. He was so far out front. And honestly, like, it took away from, again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but the bass on the song is so fucking good. It's so good.
It's really good.
I wonder if they turned him up in response to the bass, because I thought the bass was a little higher than on the other tunes.
The bass should have drowned everything out. The bass is killer on this song. It's so good.
For the fans at home who don't know, Tom plays bass.
But you know what? Saying I play bass and as like to equate me to this bass performance is like saying I play golf because I play mini golf sometimes, and also Tiger Woods plays golf. And this is like one of the best, just rhythmically and melodically sensitive bass playing that you're gonna hear on an album. It's free, but it's not rambling. It is a lot of beautiful slides. It's not technically perfect, but it is like exactly what this song needs. If it wasn't for the bass performance on this song, and frankly, a lot of the songs, they would be pretty damn boring. And it does save some of these more ho-hum. And again, very long songs.
All right, we're going to move things along here to our next song on the focus list. My God, this one is like 10 minutes long. Madam George.
Down Cypress Avenue, with the childlike vision sleeping into view. The clicking, clacking of the high heel shoe. Ford and Fitzroy, Madam George. Might sing with us.
This was my guess for what you were going to say was the worst song on the record that you would be the most annoyed by. Again, I don't feel that way. I feel like it fits perfectly. I know he says love to love to love to love 700 times.
And the love that loves, the love that loves, the love that loves to love, the love that loves, the love to love, the love that loves to love.
Oh, no. It's not. He says,
Love the
Yeah.
glove, like smell the glove, I think.
and as you're about to leave, she jumps up and says, hey, love, you forgot your gloves. And the gloves, the gloves, the gloves, the gloves, the gloves, the gloves, the gloves. He's saying loves and gloves again and again. Like, this is like where my thesis of like, oh, you just discovered weed. That's what's going on here. You're just like high out of your fucking mind for the first time. And you're like, yeah, oh man, love and glove rhyme. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. I said it was like running into Hemingway at a bar and he's holding court and doesn't make any sense, but you also don't want to leave.
I don't know. I did want to leave at this song. I did want to leave by the end of this song.
Lester Bangs, who I think is a music critic.
Great name.
Yeah.
Again, we got Dick Rowe.
Lester Bangs. He's name checked in It's the End of the World as We Know It.
Yeah, and he's played by Philip Seymour Hoffman in Almost Famous.
He said that this song was possibly one of the most compassionate pieces of music ever made. It asks us, arranges that we see the plight of what... Anyway, it's about a drag queen. He said it was terrible. So.
Well, actually, there's a synergy there. I wonder if Philip Seymour Hoffman, because Philip Seymour Hoffman references this song in his Oscar acceptance speech when he wins for Magnolia. The love to gloves thing. Yeah.
How the fuck do you know that?
I saw it in an article when I was Googling this week.
Okay.
All right, at the 8-minute and 15-second mark, something does happen. A ride cymbal comes in and goes ding, 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 but then quickly fades out of the song. That was like the only thing that stuck out of my head. I heard it. I was like, oh my God, I'm 10 minutes in. Hey, there's a ride cymbal. And then it stopped.
I wonder if Van Morrison could see everybody in the room in this recording session. Like, he's in the booth, but there's probably a window and he can see everybody. Connie K starts hitting the ride cymbal. He just looks up sharply like, hey! He's like, oh, sorry.
This may have been the one that one of these songs went on like an additional 12 to 15 minutes, and they actually spliced and cut it because it was just so insanely long and nothing happened, according to the engineer. And so they found a spot where like something happened, and that may be this point where the ride cymbal comes in and they kind of faded out. All right, we're going to round out our focus list with the last song here. This
on the album, by the way. I didn't like this one at all. This seems so pedestrian, but I feel like it also oddly kind of connected to his later works more so than a lot of the other stuff on here.
That's so funny you mentioned it, because I wrote the opposite. I thought this reminded me of Them, specifically that it kept making me think of that It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, the thing that we talked about on the Beck record that Beck sampled. That, it's the vibraphone here instead of some kind of organ maybe on that. But it's funny you thought it was future. I thought it was past.
Well, I could be fucking up the Van Morrison timeline, because part of the research this week showed me that I knew nothing about the Van Morrison timeline of songs released. And so, yeah, maybe I was thinking earlier stuff, but it had more connection to his other stuff, where I feel like most of Astral Weeks seems singular in its approach. And also, this guitar is out of tune. Like, badly out of tune.
Oh my God. You can't tune a vibraphone. So by default, that becomes the instrument that everything in the studio has to tune to. Van Morrison didn't do that. And when they start playing together, you can actually hear the whoa, 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 whoa in the background as the guitar chords ring out over top of the vibraphone.
It's not as out of tune as like Ringworm or whatever you played earlier, though.
You're talking about the Fuck You album that he put out? It's not as bad as that.
I don't know how they let that slide. Like, if I was the one printing that vinyl, I'd have been like, no, dog.
No, I don't think that got released until way, way later.
Oh, okay.
But it's like he knew he was risking some kind of, getting sued for doing it that way, but it did manage to get him out of his deal.
I got to tell you, I can't believe that they let the out-of-tune guitar on this song go. And they weren't just like, after one take, there's an engineer in the room. The best engineers that I've ever worked with, they have dog ears. And they're like, hey man, that's out of tune. Check your guitar. Or like, that background vocal, not good enough. You got to do it better. Or that lead vocal, not good enough. You got to do it better. Those are like the engineers and producers that are additive. And you got to imagine that there's a guy sitting behind the controls who's been listening to bands like as a job for a long time, and he'd be like, hey dog, like, your shit's way out of tune, like way out of tune. Why don't you just fix that for the next take? Maybe he was like, no, we got it on the first one. Fuck you. Like, maybe that's what happened, but come on. It's really obvious.
Hey man, kudos to him at the 2-minute and 5-second mark. He hits a really nice high note.
But something
I thought that stuck out. That was nice. Again, I kind of dig his voice.
He's got a great voice. He has, and I don't think he was at the time, but he's got a fat guy voice. Like his cheeks sound like they're very full, and like he could have a little bit extra food stuck in there. Yeah,
Madam George. Yeah, you're right.
I think he's always been kind of stout. I don't know if he was fat, but he's
5'5".
Oh wow,
He's a small guy.
He's just a wee little lad. All right.
Hey, everybody, we'll get back to the show in less than a minute, but in that time, I have a request. If you have ever gotten any value from this podcast, whether you learned something new about your favorite band, laughed at one of our tweet-length reviews, or screamed at your podcast player for something we got wrong, please take a few seconds and leave us a rating and a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Those two simple things can help spread the word about the show and help us continue to bring you our unique takes on music history, as well as all the bands you love and hate. All right, so that wraps up the focus list. We are going to now throw things around the studio to see whether or not you actually need to hear this album before you die. So let's throw it over to Phil.
So, Rob, I think you made a lot of great points, and I think with some of the guidance you've offered today, I'll likely listen to this record again and try to like really take it in. But at this time, I think based on the standards I've set for myself, I've got to give it a no. I've got to give Astral Weeks a pass. I think the main factor I'm using here, the main measuring stick, is that I gave Devendra Banhart's record a pass, sort of on the same basis, right? Which was, it was background music. It didn't really stand up to me staring at it. That's sort of how I felt about this. Although I would say as background music, this is far better than the Devendra Banhart record we listened to, back at episode 20. I mean, light years better than that record, which I just didn't particularly enjoy.
I like how I'm the one who takes a wrong stance and just sticks with it forever. And we get this vote from Phil, and somehow I have this reputation. Listen, I'm going to go next here and say that you absolutely do need to listen to this album. And Phil's out of his fucking mind. I mentioned it before. A lot of this album seems singular. It seems like it was a product of a very specific time and place and a very specific set of circumstances. And I think that just in general, it's cool. It's not hard or offensive to listen to. And yeah, I'm going to fanboy out again. Like, the musicianship on this album is pretty damn high, driven mostly by the bass. And I think that I haven't heard a whole lot of other stuff that has been able to replicate this in a way that comes close to what you get on this album. And so, yeah, listen to it. You're going to be happy you listened to it, I think.
Rob.
Yeah, it's a really easy yes for me. For anyone who's been paying attention, you absolutely should listen to this. I agree with what Tom said. It's unique. I can't think of anything else that sounds like this, and it clearly set a lot of ships sailing. People were very influenced by it, and it has this, like we've been describing, this vibe of an impressionistic painting where you might have to kind of step back from the wall to see it in its true form. I had this thought that some music is directly inspiring. Like, you hear it and you say, hey, I want to write songs like this or make records that sound this way. And other stuff is indirectly inspiring. And Astral Weeks is that for me. And I suspect it's that for a lot of people. It's wild and uninhibited. Never once did I think this is my own personal taste, like that I would make a record like this or that I'd be able to. But it's singular, as Tom said. So please listen to it.
All right, it's going to come down to me, and we'll get the email address all ready for the hate mail that's going to come. But the more I learned about this album, the less impressive it was. He spent months working on this material, running through it live with other musicians. The addition of strings that he said ruined it, so his vision was just him, those other guys strumming on chords. And lastly, one of the other things I read was that in order to quote unquote fill out the album, they just tried a couple blues songs. So even his vision was not that honed if they just needed another song. And they're like, oh, let's try a couple songs here, see how it works. So to me, it felt like it was not a very cohesive effort. And so I'm actually going to say no on this one.
But you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Tie goes to the runner, baby.
Van Morrison, your snooze fest. Sorry. Van Morrison, Astral Weeks, you're on the list. All right, next up on the show, we are going to throw things over to Rob, who has his hand in the mailbag. Rob, what do you got?
Thanks so much, Adam. Got a couple fun mailbags, including somebody from Bonnie Old Ireland. So Martin from Dublin writes, thank you for the podcast. Always interesting and informative. In your Achtung Baby episode, the last time we covered an Irish artist, I should say. In that episode, you spoke about how Bono got his name. In Dublin, there were hearing aid shops that advertised a product called Bono Vox. He just thought he was getting a very punk name by picking something that was powerfully uncool like a hearing aid. He had no knowledge of what it meant in Latin because Latin was not something people talked about in Dublin in the late 70s. I think U2, he goes on to say, I think U2 will be remembered for their live shows rather than their albums. Achtung Baby has, like all U2 albums, some good moments, but also some forgettable tracks. Keep up the fun podcast.
Wow. All right. From the horse's mouth. We love it.
From the horse. We love to get more information from the people who really live in these places. Martin's writing from Dublin. He knows about Dublin. And I have another one just like that. We have Gareth from the UK. In fact, from a town called Coventry. And he writes in, I've missed the last few podcasts after you laughed at Spiritualize's laser-guided melodies. You clearly didn't get them.
I think I gave that a yes.
Which is stop rewriting the rules. You know you didn't. I have the scrolls in front of me, which is a shame, but okay, let's let that slip. He goes on to say, I was born in 1971 in Coventry, so the Specials, who we also recently covered on an episode, were a huge thing. Recall that they were from that town. With that in mind, it's unusual for me to come across folks who aren't familiar with the band. You seemed to have understood it, though, understood the record, which is cool. It makes me happy that people can listen to that record for the first time 46 years or so later and still enjoy it. And he goes on to say, you kind of worked it out. I'm glad you got the kind of overall cultural message, the two-tone thing, because racism was a massive problem in 70s. He calls it Cov, the town. So very big deal. Anyway, last thought, you alluded to earworms. I think you'll find yourself going back to that Specials record from time to time for the rest of your lives, and that's a good thing. So he closes by saying, Rob, flick that rude boy switch back on, my man.
I got to say, listening to that episode, I was surprised that nobody was familiar with Dandy Livingston. Like, I actually really like his stuff. That old kind of like, he was the original Rudy, A Message to You Guys. He's got that song, Think About That, Think About the World.
Okay, yeah.
He's got some good shit. I was surprised that nobody had heard about them.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, folks, for writing in. If you have something you want to tell us, you can write to us at 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. We look forward to reading whatever you write. We'll try to read it on the air, assuming it's coherent. So well done, gents. All right, we are now going to throw things over to Tom, who's got his hand on the Albinator ready to pick our homework for next week.
Okay, yes, I am going to get this Albinator out of its flow state, and hopefully it will be able to pull it together to give us a coherent album and not just a random list of and then another song, and then another song, and then another song, and then another song.
Pull it out of the astral projection that
exactly.
it's stuck in.
It's stuck in the slipstream, baby.
Right.
So, without any further ado, drum roll, please. We will be listening to oh, yes, I'm looking forward to this. The album is Destroyer by the band Kiss.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but I know nothing about Kiss.
I have no predetermined opinions.
Rob, do you remember, Rob, when we were in Vegas, I believe, and we were very drunk? And where was it, Reno or Vegas?
Vegas, I think.
Yeah, we
went there to see Steely Dan, the anti-Kiss, if you will.
That's right. Yes. And we were very drunk the night before, and we woke up and we're kind of hungover and we're looking for something to do. And there was a Kiss-themed mini golf that we went to. And it was the lamest fucking thing in the entire universe. And then all the people there were like, oh, you're like Kiss fans? You're like, you like Kiss? We're like, not really. No.
Yeah, let me guess. Let me guess. There was a hole where you hit the ball up a ramp made out of Gene Simmons' tongue.
Oh, you fucking wish it was that cool. It was not even close to that cool. It was so fucking lame.
Yeah, it was like something a hobbyist made in their garage.
Yeah, and then charge people $25 to do.
I'm sorry to hear that.
It was terrible. Oh my God. I'm looking forward to just shitting all over Kiss next week. I'm sorry if there's any Kiss fans out there, but I do not want to rock and roll all
any
night.
Kiss fan? They're like it's a Kiss army, right?
The whole Kiss army. Yeah.
All right, folks, there you have it. You have your homework assignment for next week. It's Destroyer by Kiss. And with that, we're going to close things out today. On behalf of 1001 Album Complaints, I'm Adam.
I'm Phil.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Tom.
Boosh.